prior to this war in Ukraine, I think nobody really understood what a modern war looked like. And there was just this belief that the US was number one. I had it. I think you had it. Much of the world
Right.
had it. But that is dissipated for many of us, especially for us that are paying
Right.
attention. We know that, that's not
Right.
true. Do you believe that belief is still a dominant belief of of U.S. military might, or is there this? Have we reached
I
this
think in
point?
the West it is, because, we talk about it, we listen to other geopolitical dissidents, and there's, within this large, significant dissident community, the understanding is crystal clear. And then when you get out of the U.S. and out of the collective West, you find it again, right? There are a lot of people who see it, who have woken up to it. But I'm struck, I do make a point of just going to mainstream media like the New York Times, and you get out of your back, it's the same old narrative. It's just, Russia is not only evil, but it's incredibly weak, but that somehow it presents a threat to all Europe. Nothing changes. It seems like it. So the narrative remains. It hasn't. We really haven't woken up to it.
Do you think that
And
belief?
there's still there's the economic side of it too. I just wanted to mention, it was something I was reading this morning. There was a paper that was presented at the very beginning of the war, back in 2022. I think it was, maybe it was a London School of Economics publication, something like that. But anyway, it just pointed out that Russia, in GDP terms, was about equal to Belgium and the Netherlands combined. And so this person very confidently predicted that Russia was going to lose the war, because Russia is just an economic midget. There's just no way. And you would think if it's a war of attrition, yeah, he'd be right. And I remember thinking that at the time. But I woke up to the reality. Now, you would think that in general, the Europeans should wake up to it. Maybe they, again, they had that supreme confidence at the beginning. It was misplaced, but they should see it by now. But you don't see it in their actions. You don't see it in the rhetoric. The narrative remains. They still just have the sense that, yeah, we're far superior. And, you're always being reassured that the Russian economy is about to collapse. It hasn't collapsed next, but with the next package, it will. They still haven't abandoned it.
Do you think that belief of U.S. supremacy, military supremacy, that belief needs to be shattered for us to end any type of hawkish behavior? Because that really is what underpins everything. This is what underpins the Europeans. He's like, we got this. We can. It's like, well, we don't got it, but we know that the U.S. is number one. So
right.
that means we got it, And then so many people still in America got it. Yeah, we can handle it. Venezuela, no problem. China put them in their place. Russia put them in their place.
Yeah, right.
Because there is that.
I think you're right.
So,
I think it's actually, and it's the same with the Ukrainians. I think it's starting to falter in Ukraine because they're the ones who are suffering the reality, directly. It's beginning to falter, but it's still there. It's still there. It's just a sense that, of course, we can't really lose this. It just must be just a lack of will on the part of the U.S., because we all know that the U.S. system is so vastly superior to the Russian system. I think that's the way a lot of Ukrainians still think. And it's just for whatever reason, they're selfish or they've got their own problems, and they're just not giving us what we need. But we know that if they did, we would win this war.
Yeah,
and it's still there. Again, it's, I think it's skepticism is starting to grow, but it's still there, and very much so. So I think, it does underpin. In the end, it underpins just all kinds of really catastrophic decisions. It's just a sense that, our power is unlimited, and refusal to recognize that, just has led us into, one catastrophe after another.
I understand that, and it makes sense. That's like they only gave us what we need, then we could win. But the thing is, what is it? What do they need? What is it that we haven't given other than
it's
nuclear
always
weapons?
something. It's always the next thing.
But we're running out of
because I've
next
heard
things.
it. I was just like, they just have to, for the longest time, they have to give us the ATACMS. They have to give us, and then they got the ATACMS. That didn't change it. It's just the F-16s. Once we have the F-16s, that'll turn the tide. They got the F-16s, so we don't hear about them. They're hiding over in the westernmost Ukraine. Well, now it's the next thing is the Tomahawks, or but that's really coming to the top rung of the ladder, right? Uh, so at some point, you hope that that again we don't actually go nuclear, and then it's understood. Oh, we went all the way up that ladder. We're at the top rung. There's not another one. Oops, we were wrong. The U.S. is not. The all-powerful deity that we thought it was.
Yeah, well, I guess it's scary because we've been in this war for over 3 years, and that attitude is still persistent throughout the West. And like we said, that this attitude, it kind of underpins the whole war effort and the ability for the U.S. to continue its aggressive posturing across the globe. So, it's ironically, like, I feel like we need to know, to avoid war, we need to have a recognition of the weakness within our own military industrial complex. And I was hoping that the Ukraine war would show that, but it still seems like we have this refusal. So it almost seems like the way to avoid war is that we actually have to go to war and just lose utterly. And then we kind of know, like, oh, that's almost what it sounds like you're saying. It's like, how can we break through to everybody that, like, hey, look, it's just not working. We're not the superpower we want to be.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't know. It's scary. The thing is, like, if we actually go all the way up to the top rung, just short of World War III, and okay, it turns out that we don't have what we are unable to supply the weapons that would enable Ukraine to win the war. Ukraine suffers a humiliating defeat. You would hope that would be, the beginning of a new, sobered up, realistic West. But again, it's just like, looking at the quality of our leadership, there's going to be all kinds of backstabbing, or not just backstabbing, but there will be a search for explanations, but the explanations will be anything but, okay, yeah, we're just not as strong as we thought we are. And, I think it's a dream that is a notion, this notion of unrivaled supremacy that is just very hard for these people to let go. It's just part of who they are.
So, I mean, you say that we'll just keep on going up this until the top rung right before World War III, but aren't we already there? I mean, what the things that we've talked that potentially that it could lead to when there's a faster collapse? You mentioned no-fly zone, Tomahawk missiles, troops on the ground. Aren't all those World War III options?
Well, I think definitely the no-fly zone and like American troops on the ground would mean World War III. Now, Tomahawks take us right to the edge. It could be, we could also just hope that Russian air defense is so good that they never, it never becomes an issue.
But still, you're shooting
and Taurus missiles.
You're still shooting missiles. The U.S. is shooting these missiles that could potentially we have equipped missiles into Russia. Right. That's what else?
No. It's
declaration of war.
Again, but what we have, what might save us again, is a very, very cool, calm, rational person on the other side who is Vladimir Putin, who, understands this, but is going to do what he can to avoid going over that precipice. And he will, retaliate, but he'll calibrate it in a way, where hopefully, the retaliation will fall just short of provoking World War III. This is not something that should inspire a whole lot of confidence, right? It's going to be a scary situation when we get there, but I think we probably will get to that point. And my hope is, maybe it's just wishful thinking, but I think we will stop short of actually taking those final steps.
Okay,
and then again, Putin will find a way of retaliating and satisfying, the hawks within his own government.
So do you think that then basically what we're looking at are the two options that we have is that Trump just has to accept a humiliating defeat, Putin goes and takes Odessa, potentially Kharkov as well, expands beyond, and Trump either walks away or just has to deal with the fact that he did have a fall of Saigon moment and his presidency, his legacy is ruined? Or the other option is World War III. Are you painting those two scenarios? Is there something in between? There's always stuff in between, right? I mean, there's a way.
Yeah. Well, there's,
there's not a lot.
people can get, yeah, there's not a lot. That's right. Politicians can be very creative when when they have their backs against the wall, and maybe they'll figure something out, some distraction. We'll start a war somewhere else, Trump, especially during maybe the early months and during his first term, he was a master of deflecting and of denying responsibility, right? You just do it quite openly. You just pretend that that what he said, I never really meant it or whatever. He may have a way of just distracting the electorate and spinning things where he just manages to pull out of it. But it's going to be hard because this is not going to be a minor event. This is not Iraq. This is in Europe, in the largest country in Europe, and it's against Russia. And I don't know how he's going to do it. I guess that's what I should say. I don't know, but maybe he's got some sort of rabbit in his hat.
Well, do you feel like it's almost a coin toss on which way it can go? Like, being able to weasel out and walk away from the whole thing, and then that's terrifying.
Yeah,
we're talking.
Yeah, no, it is right. I didn't know. And then I would say people say that we go to World War III or the beginnings of World War III. It doesn't mean inevitably that it's going to a nuclear war, but the risk goes way, way up at that point. The chance that we go nuclear, it goes way, way up at that point. So I just hope that the saner minds, they say, this is terrible, President, but, we just can't do this. This means World War III, which means maybe the end of the world. Let's do something else, Mr. President. And hopefully, Trump will say, yeah, okay.
I hope
we'll
so.
blame it on Biden.
I hope so. Well, I mean, that's terrifying. When we have these talks, we've talked about the possibility of World War III, but it's always just seemed like hyperbole. It just doesn't ever seem like anything that will actually happen. But when we have these discussions, like, my God, this really is. This could go either way.
Right. Let's be honest too. I mean, we're getting a lot of war talk from European leaders saying that predicting war with Russia. Maybe this is just a very cynical ploy to increase military budgets, scare their populations for that purpose or whatever. But whether or not it's cynical, it's just like war is in the air and people are getting habituated to it. And that makes, I think, war all the more likely in the long run. It may not be the long run. See, the thing is, like this collapse, maybe a march on Odessa. I don't know. Again, we've talked about, the Ukrainians clearly are weakening and are showing themselves unable to hold the line in a way that they could before. They seem to be nearing a collapse, but still we got a ways to go. But you just don't know. These are really, there's a great deal of uncertainty as to the future course of this war. It could end, there could be a total collapse within the next year, and then we can see the Russians marching on Odessa by the end of next year, or it could go on for another 3 years. I don't know. But either way, it's really not that far in the future.
Right. I'm just thinking if NATO really did get involved in this war, NATO's just so ill-equipped for this war. Like you said, we were prepared to fight the last war, the war where you do these, maneuvers with your tanks and then you fly your aircraft over. None of the training that I think NATO has been doing over the past 20, 30 years is worth diddly squat, but it's so ingrained, their method, their way of fighting, that we are the greatest fighting force on the planet, that I think that is going to be incredibly damaging to them when they actually do end up in a real war. It's like, oh man, we actually everything, all of our training, all of our equipment is not suited for this war.
Right.
We are screwed.
Well, that's what the Ukrainians have been saying, is that, I received this training. Some of it was helpful But, frankly, I told my instructor, this is not going to work. You don't understand what's happening out there. This is, this would be a total, you're telling me me and my platoon should do this. We would all be dead within 5 minutes if we attempted to do that. You don't understand. Um, and, I think there's some sort of awareness like that's seeping into the military institutions. They're starting to think, look at drones. It's really very slow, and I think they're way behind the curve. But in general, they still haven't woken up to the reality. I remember during that, the summer offensive of 2023, there was all that hullabaloo. There was that great deal of confidence. They were going to, because they had trained these guys and given them NATO equipment. They had NATO methods and whatever. And of course, it was just a total disaster. Ended in a tremendous defeat for the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians understood that. They started actually changing their tactics halfway through because the NATO tactics that they had been taught were not working. But then instead of getting, admissions of error from NATO officials or American generals, it was rather that, the stupid Ukrainians, they're not following our, we gave them a plan and they're not sticking to it. The stupid Ukrainians are casualty averse, saying that they should go out there and get killed on your, and I think unfortunately that, those same people just refuse to see the new reality and are living, in this past where American arms and Western arms were supreme. They're still running the show. And if they actually, if they enter the war, they're going to have the same experience that the Ukrainians had in 2023.
Right.
And maybe even worse now, actually, because the Russians have moved way beyond from that point.
That's true.
They have many more drones and many more sophisticated drones. And I think it would be a really nasty wake-up call.
Yesterday you were saying you got this PBS documentary of the summer offensive of 2023, and you started watching it last night. Did you finish it?
I did, yeah. I would recommend it. It's done by PBS, and it's on the Ukrainian side. So, it's kind of framed from the Ukrainian point of view, but you see how things are on the ground. I think it does give you a sense of how these battles have unfolded. Yeah, and here you don't really get the full extent of it. You're told at the beginning, some of these soldiers I'm saying is they're kind of shaking their heads who spent 3 months and we're trying to take this little town of Andriivka. I looked it up. Andriivka had a population of 74 in 2001. And I remember that battle. I remember following it closely. And back there in 2022, it just went on and on and on. It was 3 months to take this one tiny, tiny little town. And the Ukrainians finally got it. You just see really the end of that process in this documentary. But you can, I would recommend, it's just, first of all, it's just what they did to get there is that they went down really a line of trees, maybe you could call it a belt of forested land between fields on both sides. They say the fields on both sides were all mined by the Russians. So that's the only way. So they spent 3 months going down this belt and they were fought all the way. And eventually they got to Andriivka. And you see at the end, they unfurled the Ukrainian flag, and there's nothing left of Andriivka. It was tiny to begin with. And then you learn, which I knew to be a fact, that the Russians took it back later. It's now like 10 miles in the rear behind, the Russians took Chasiv Yar, and they're now in Konstantinivka, and this little town of Andreevka is probably 10 miles in the rear. It was just a meaningless battle, and who knows how many lives were expended in it.
Scary war. Too many people have died, and it just sounds like we can't extricate ourselves. It is astonishing to me that where we are now, when this war started, I think a lot of people were just thinking like, it's a little scary, but America's always fighting wars. There's always wars around the world. And here we are 3 years later, and it's just, it just keeps on escalating. And we had Trump who said that he was going to end it in 24 hours. He was just all about it. And now I'm just like, okay, once the dogs of war are out, it's just, you can't put them away.
No.
You just can't put them away. I just can't believe that we're looking at this situation right now.
Well, again, it's in a lot of ways it's similar to World War One. You know, the various armies, were, I think they were confident that the whole thing would be settled in a month or two, and similar to the American Civil War. That's the way it began, and then. But of course, it went on for another 4 years, and we're talking about, in the case of World War I, tens of millions killed.
And so much.
There's more similars too. That was a war of attrition with very, very little movement on the line during those 4 years. I saw a map actually this morning showing the over the course of 2 years, maybe it was 1915 and 1916, like the amount of movement. Like the amount of territory that the Western allies were able to take from the Germans on the Western Front, and it was tiny. It's actually the Russians have taken a lot more in the past 2 years than they took. But of course, it ended in a collapse. So we may see something very similar.
Yeah, it's scary to think that the lives of so many millions of people are just in the hands of the egos of a few. And I think that's that's the real danger here, is the ego of our leaders.
Yeah.
They're like, I can't go down. Everything is about their legacy. They want to be remembered in history as this great person instead of the person that made all these mistakes and lost everything.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's just, you can see, people always want to do the World War II parallels. It's like, if you're just stubborn enough, like Winston Churchill, and just say, no, we won't make peace. We're just going to have war. And then you win it. And now you're this great hero. And everybody talks about how great you are. You just have to be persistent and stick. And who cares if 60 million people die?
Yeah,
you won. You won, and now you're a hero.
Well, in the case of Churchill, though, in the end, he was confident that he had the U.S. at his back, and the U.S. was the Colossus at that time. And you're right. In the end, it wasn't a matter of will, though it's kind of, we point to Churchill and say, his great speeches and the summoning up of the will of the British people. But I don't want to minimize any of that. That's real as far as it goes. But the war would not have been won if it wasn't for the tremendous manufacturing capabilities of the U.S. and the millions of men that they were able to put in the field.
Right.
And that's in the end. If it was just about speeches, the British may have held out for a while, but if they never had the Americans to come in, it would have ended very differently.
Right. But now the manufacturing giant, the Colossus, it's China, both technologically and in manufacturing, just north of the United States. Just the last thing I just want to mention is I was telling you yesterday, I was reading in China, there is a private firm in Sichuan that has developed hypersonic missiles for less than $100,000 per hypersonic missile. So this is a private company, really. They're private company that's specializing in air travel. They're planning to do hypersonic air travel by 2030 or something like this. But they've learned how to develop these hypersonic missiles that travel at Mach 7 that cost less than a Ford Raptor here in the United States, the new one. It's $96,000 for them to produce one of these things. The United States we haven't even fielded a hypersonic. Now we have private firms in China that have developed advanced hypersonics for super cheap, and then it's not even part of China's military industrial base. These are just these private guys on their own that are doing like, hey, we figured out how to make these things super cheap, because they know that it only has to fly for 360 seconds. We don't care about anything else. So they have been able to abstain from a lot of like the gold plated. They use some kind of like foam cement as the heat shield, which is supposed to not be possible, but they're like, we don't care. It's going to blow up anyway. So, and as long as it flies for 5 minutes, we're all right. And so they did it. It just shows you just how far advanced, the industrial base is in China compared to the United States on just so many sectors. So I just hope we can break through to people that, it's not being unpatriotic or anything to talk about the weakness of the U.S. military. It's good to be humble. It's good to be.
Yeah.
It's a patriotic thing. Let's recognize that we don't have this strength, and it's not a bad thing. You know, it just means it's a bad thing when we're trying to start wars and projecting overseas. But you know, maybe we can go back and focus on our own defense. It's just so silly the United States for this. To want to have such a large military with 750 military bases all over the world when we have 2 oceans on each side of our country. We have Canada, the North, Mexico, South. That's it. It's like we are literally the safest country. The problem with our country is all the problems that are happening within because we can't even take care of our own country. We're too busy just causing problems around the world. It's frustrating. Really frustrating, Dad. And now we're going to World War III. And I was hoping that...
We hope not.
Yeah, well, I was hoping not too. My argument was that the fundamental weakness of the U.S. military will make us avoid it. But after this discussion, now I'm not so sure. But it sounds like that you're saying just that belief in U.S. supremacy is just so baked into our identity that we can't get rid of it. And so we're going to need a more just a humiliating defeat. We might need an actual war where real Americans are getting blown up and then realize like, oh, damn, this was stupid. Why are we over here? We shouldn't have done this. We're not as strong as we thought we were.
Right.
I hope it doesn't happen, but this is going to be a long winter, Dad. I think this is going to be a really harsh winter for Ukraine, and that means some crazy decisions might get made in the next 3 months. You think so?
Yeah, well, there have been a lot of crazy decisions. I think that's the only thing we can be completely certain of.
Yeah. Okay. All right, well, we can end it there. Any final words?
No.
Okay.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Dad. Have a good rest of the day and a great weekend.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.